So we'll be making everything available to everybody, lots of links, lots of resources and stuff in this deck. And so we'll be sending that out to everybody afterward. So to start, let's let you know who the heck you're hearing from. So we'll go alphabetically. Danny, who are you?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. My name is Danny Watson, and I am currently the Chief Operating Officer for One Therapy Network. We're a managed services organization in Oklahoma City that provides back office support and business coaching for pediatric therapy clinics. So speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, all across the country. I was in oil and gas for about 10 years, mainly focused on reservoir engineering, and I'll share a little bit more about that piece of the story and the transition that I made over to my current role here a little bit later.
Cool. You're muted, Emily. There you go.
Rookie mistake. Nice to virtually meet everybody. My name is Emily Minnis. I work for Infinity Consulting Solutions. We are a staffing firm. My location is going to be in Houston, and I primarily focus in the technology space. So whether it's web development, IT support, security, all the way up to C-level placements. I work with clients and with candidates to help find place dream jobs and help companies grow. Again, I'm in Houston and happy to help anybody that needs assistance.
Great. Natasha Narayan, CEO of Iceberg IQ. We work with software companies to help them really understand what their customers' experiences are. So it's under like win-loss and retention research. I grew up in a small town in northern Alberta, which was an oil and gas town. So this topic is very near and dear to me. Been in technology for over 20 years in Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. So yeah, I hope that we can provide some value for everyone here, and excited to be on the webinar.
Awesome. Thanks, Natasha. Yeah, my name's Matt Harriman. I founded Pod2 Consulting last year. Our mission is to make work a source of joy for as many people as possible, whether that's helping people find work that they'll find more fulfilling, or by making their managers or their companies a little bit better. So my background is oil and gas to start. I worked for Chesapeake Energy 2011, 2013, back in the day with Danny. And then left there to join a startup software company, Intersight, in oil and gas. And then grew up through the ranks, did a whole bunch of stuff there, and then left there last year to do what I'm doing now. So what we want to get to today is to answer questions for folks. So the way that this whole thing started is I posted on LinkedIn and said, hey, people that are looking to get out of oil and gas, what are you looking at? Would it be helpful to learn more about software? And so the answer was a resounding yes. For somebody that has almost never posted anything on social media until the last month, getting 50 likes on a post was significant. So started talking to different people, talked to Natasha, ended up reconnecting with Danny, and we just wanted to put something together to where we could help people make that decision. So should I consider working in software, helping people understand it? Where could I fit? All of those types of questions. I think we wanted to put together the content to help you guys answer that. A lot of these questions we can't answer for you, obviously, but hopefully we can provide some of the information that'll help you make those decisions. So first, a little bit about the software industry. So I'm not one to try and predict markets or forecast things very often, but quick Google, right? Software industry projection 2020. Every graph is going up and to the right. The general consensus is solid, right? You compare that to oil industry projection 2020, and a lot of these were before COVID, right? A lot of this data, and it's a mixed bag. There's some up and to the right. There's some that are total doomsday scenarios. There's some that are staying flat. All this kind of stuff. But the thing that is very, very clear about software is that it's just inherently diversified. So you can look right now. There's a lot of software companies that are doing really, really well. right? Zoom, obviously, probably doing better than any tech company that exists right now. There's a lot of the other softwares that support other industries like healthcare, shipping and logistics, and a lot of these different things, right? So the number on the right, software continues to grow and grow and grow, and I don't foresee that changing. Yeah, I think that there's, just like in oil and gas, there was a little bit of a private equity VC bubble of people funding growth at all costs. But I think that the underlying kind of fundamentals of the industry on the demand side are very, very strong. So let's get to a couple of definitions to just kind of orient ourselves around software, tech. Okay, what are all these things that we're talking about? So technology is the application of science to solve real world problems, right? That's a very broad term that can encompass a lot of things. Software is a small part of that, right? That's the piece where people are making computers do functional things that are useful, right? And then also underneath technology is basically everything else on Earth, right? So from farming to pharmaceuticals to medical, the financial sector, aerospace, everything else is technically under technology or tech. But the interesting part is that software is used to support every single one of these. Software is used to support the software industry, right? There's a whole market of software providers that whose customer is software companies, right? So like I said, inherently diversified and very, very broad market. So let's look at some of the companies. So that's kind of a very high level, right, industry and terminology view. Let's look at some of the companies within this and how they're structured, how they work. So some of the fundamentals to understand about software companies is who are their target customers. So you'll hear the term B2B, business to business. So these are companies that develop software to sell to other companies. B2C is business straight to consumer. So these are the companies that sell their product to, or subscriptions to their product to individuals, not companies. A lot of companies, so Facebook, Google, Twitter are both, right? So everybody thinks of these social media companies as B2C, right? So they have consumers on their platform, but they're selling a lot of that. For one, some of them selling data, but a lot of them are selling ads and doing a lot of these things. So there's a B2B aspect to what they're doing. Another one to think about when you're looking at companies to potentially work for that shifts kind of how they operate is what's the delivery method of their software. So on-premises means that the software must be installed or implemented on that company's servers or on site or different things like that. SaaS, so software as a service, means that the software company hosts it. So the tool sits on our server in the cloud or some other kind of place that we host, and customers access it by the internet typically, or maybe through their intranet in some other secure way, whatever that is. This also drives the revenue model a lot of times. So on premises, it's harder for a lot of companies to manage, okay, how many users are using the tool? Is that changing over time? And they'll have their revenue model based on those different things. So they might tend toward a one-time purchase. So customer pays big bucks up front, they can use the software for life. The other model, and what I would say more prevalent, is subscription. So not just in software, the subscription models too, that's applying to lots and lots of other companies, but that's a pay as you go, right? Either it's an annual contract that renews, or it could be monthly based on usage, and all different kind of things. So we included a couple of other links on this slide to other terminology, right? So as you're getting oriented, there's a lot of acronyms and terms and a lot of things that will be said in interviews and when you're talking to people and all these things, and that can help. So I think the next place to go makes sense is looking at how these companies will behave. So when I'm thinking about, okay, do I want to possibly work for a company? I want to understand the culture, and since that's driven from the top, let's look at ownership. So how software companies are funded and or owned. So the start is bootstrap, right? So founders, executives, or employees at the company own the whole thing. Or maybe there's a minor outside investor or something. The goals of this kind of company could be very, very different. Some could be a lifestyle business where they want to have good quality of life and they want to make money and they just want to keep that running. They don't want to grow too big. They'd rather it be easier than grow too fast, right? There's other ones that want to change the world, and so that's the real mission, right? They want to do something special. They want to do something big, and they'll kind of do whatever it takes to get there, whether they want to be the ones to do it bootstrapping all the way or not. Very common with early stage startups is the goal is to get funding. So the whole goal is to grow fast, show a good profile to investors, and that way you get a good multiple, good valuation so that you can get funding. And then the other one is to exit, right? At some point, most founders will either die or sell their company, right? And so they'll want to find a way to sell the company to somebody else. That could be an investment firm or it could be another software company. The next piece is private funding. So private equity, venture capital, whatever, if they've got a controlling interest, there's really two goals. And the primary one is probably to exit. They want to invest their money, and then in 3 to 5 years, they probably want a 3 to 5x multiple on their money. There might be some that take it on for cash flow, and so they'll want to drive profit, but most of the time it's going to be exit. Same story if they don't have a controlling interest. I think the culture and who makes decisions is different, obviously, if the investors have controlling interest versus not, but the goal is probably going to be similar. And then the last piece is for publicly traded companies. I think we're all fairly familiar with how they work. Okay, so a lot of talk about kind of exit and ownership. Well, how do these companies get valued, and what numbers do the owners care about? So primary one is recurring revenue. So depending on the model, recurring revenue could be measured monthly, so that would be MRR, or a lot of times it's annual recurring revenue. So every year, how many subscriptions do these companies, or how many dollars through subscription do these companies have that they expect to continue into the future? So each subscription is a forward-looking projection of cash flow that gets modified based on how that company does that year. So if you look at, let's say that this is the 2019 annual recurring revenue number for a company. One of the things that impacts that number is churn. So the number of customers that leave or decrease their subscription to the software, that revenue dollar goes down. And then a big one that I think a lot of folks, a little bit of a nuance of the subscription model, and especially on the B2B side, is infill sales. The opportunity within current customers to expand and grow and sell more. A lot of times that market is bigger and more easily achieved than the new sales on a yearly basis. So then obviously you have the new sales, adding new customers, new logos to the mix. And so that's another increase to your recurring revenue. And then that ends up getting you to your next number. So how these companies will be typically driving is to minimize churn, maximize infill, and new sales. So those are the real kind of impacts on the primary metric of recurring revenue. So on these valuations, and this is the reason that a lot of private equity and venture capital money really, really like software, is because this is a recurring revenue model. You get a multiple on what that year's revenue is. So if your recurring revenue is $10 million, there's a fair chance that you could sell your company for somewhere between 30 million and 120 million. Right? Very interesting for investors and very interesting for the founders that own a big chunk of the company. Obviously, there's a lot of other things that impact valuation. There's growth rate, there's profitability, there's growth potential. There's a lot of other things that go into it, but recurring revenue is going to be the main driver. Usually, pretty recently, there was an app called Clubhouse that is kind of similar to Zoom, except that there's larger rooms, people can jump in and out, and whatever, you can Google it. But this software company, calling it a company is a little bold, but valued at $100 million, zero revenue model. They had no users 2 months ago, right? They've blown up, got very, very, very popular, especially in Silicon Valley and in that community. And so they got valued at $100 million, and after 2 months of having the company live, the two founders each were able to pull, I think, $1 million off the table, which is crazy. That's the exception. The other stuff that we just talked about is more the rule. Okay, so how do companies go about growing, driving their ARR? So typical company structure, there's the back office functions, there's product, which is development, and that's where the tool, the software gets created, maintained, etc. And then there's the front office, and the front office is customer facing, back office is not. So if we think about product, right, we'll talk about development, there's QA, QC, product management, which is the interface between customers and development to help drive what direction the product development goes, what new features make the most sense, those kinds of things. You see data science kind of sitting there. That could really go just about anywhere. I think some companies have data science sitting centrally, and it drives and analyzes kind of everything in the business. Some places it's sitting in marketing, some it's in product, some it's in HR, right? There's a lot of different places that the data science can live because it's broad. But when people are looking at potentially moving from oil and gas into software, I think the back office those are the most obviously translatable. So if you're working in HR, accounting, finance, IT, etc., those translate directly. Those skills remain similar. One that's interesting there is corporate development. So in software, corporate development is essentially A&D. So they look at potential acquisitions of other software companies to acquire. They look at investors and manage those relationships on working those deals through, and potentially some of the integration on the backside. So a lot of economic analysis, business cases, working deals. So that one could be potentially interesting, I think, for some folks with that kind of experience in oil and gas. But for the people that aren't in back office functions and don't want to learn how to be a programmer, I think the front office is probably the most likely landing spot. From marketing, sales, delivery, customer success, those are pieces where, depending on skill set and personality and different things, there could be fits there. So I want to spend some time digging in on those. So as we look at translating skills from oil and gas to software, I think about oil wells and software customers are very similar in that there's a workflow, there's kind of a process where, call it an oil well, oil field goes from exploration through to appraisal, development, maintenance. And the way that each of these stages work, right? You have the opportunity that you need to find, you need to turn that into a reality, you need to do the work to both add the value, start the cash flow, and then maintain and grow that. Exact same thing works for software, right? This is the same process. This kind of flow works for software customers. They get marketed to, so they're identified as an opportunity, and then sales engages them, tries to convert them into a customer. Delivery or implementation does the work, the implementation, the installation, training, whatever that is. And then you move to customer success, which includes account management, infill sales, technical support, a lot of different things that it takes, workovers, right? All of the different stuff that it takes to keep your production up and running. So I think it's worth going into these in a little bit more detail. And I apologize if I'm going fast. We have a lot of Q&A that came in that I want to make sure we have time for that to cover. So I'll remind everybody again, this deck will be going out and you'll be able to look at this, click the links, lots of resources, all that stuff. So not every company has this exact structure, but all of these things must happen. So marketing, right, we talked about you have to find opportunities, right? So there's a lot of different functions that go into that. One thing that might be surprising to people is that running, like just managing a Facebook account and putting together ads is such a tiny part of marketing. The analytics, the technical nature of it is so much deeper than most people realize. Sales, I'll gloss over that a little bit because Natasha will talk to us about sales and customer success in just a minute. But I think on the enterprise side, I think the complexity of the sales is very interesting because when you're selling to big companies, there's a lot of work to be done there. Delivery. So for more technical folks, the right end of the spectrum will be more applicable, I think. So if it's a software that needs to be installed, if there's integrations that need to be done, that kind of work is there. Implementation work could be more on the consulting and training type side. Project management, huge need. And that's another softer skill that I think a lot of folks in oil and gas have that people or that companies in tech need. One tool to think about, and when you're looking at companies that you think you might want to apply for or look into deeper, is think about the tools that you use. So no matter the role that you're going into, having customer experience as a user of that tool is super valuable, especially on the implementation side, especially on the customer facing side. And then customer success, like I mentioned, this is the piece where we need to keep and grow the customers. So Natasha,
yeah, happy to jump in. So sales in this world has changed a lot over the last 20 years. Matt was talking about on-prem. So it used to be before that you would work with a client, you'd sign a deal, and then that was it. You know, it could be a 3 to 5 year contract, and then it gets implemented and you're good to go and you kind of walk away. And what's happened is SaaS has really the model shifted to more SaaS and recurring revenue and probably the last 10 years. So now it's not more about that upfront investment, but making sure that you're continually investing in the customer success. And so that was the advent of this whole CS industry, which really boomed in the last 5 years. And Matt mentioned is like one of the top fastest growing professions. So for sales, there's a lot of great sales books out there, which I'm happy to share if anyone wants to connect on LinkedIn. But yes, definitely complex sales, like large account management. In the B2B space, you could be doing deals that are like 10K a year up to ones that are hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. And there's always new features being released as well. So it's just become a lot more rapid in the development. And yeah, you know, being able to multitask, being able to manage multiple projects at a time, relationship management, which Matt calls out, and networking, I think really leaning into LinkedIn and Meetup and some of the online resources, which Emily referred to, will be key for that. And then CS is all about, okay, we've got this client. How do we make sure that they're launched, they're seeing value, they're adopting, and then they're actually renewing with us. And so when you're talking about renewal rates of anywhere from like 85 to 95%, and then over 100% of your customer base, that's when you start going into those crazy multipliers that Matt was referring to, like 10x, 15x. So, you know, entire organizations are becoming more customer centric, knowing that they need to invest in the client to make sure that they continue to have them as clients ongoing.
awesome. Thanks, Natasha.
Nice.
So just took a look at the chat. I appreciate everybody, or a bunch of people putting in where they're from. We got people from Canada, Argentina, Colombia. Hey, Andres. And we've also got somebody from wherever the frac spread might be. So I appreciate that very much. That's awesome. All right. So I think throwing a lot of information, I think, at you guys. There's a lot of resources. There's a lot of stuff to navigate. And so one thing I wanted to do is put together, there's a list of some of the resources. There's a bunch more on the next slide, but from things like social media for networking and gaining access to ideas, to Google, right? Targeted Google search can do pretty good things for you when you're trying to learn things, to really good training resources like Cerebral Selling, Khan Academy, to like education, like Lambda School, very cool model where they have deferred tuition until you get a job, right? If you're in Texas, I think there's some governmental nonsense that keeps you from being able to use that one. But that's the way it goes. And then there's the more, I guess, non-traditional routes that are really, really gaining steam. So Gumroad is one that we've put here. So that's a marketplace to where you can take and set up your own store, right? Effectively for, it can be training, it can be coaching, it can be action figures that you've painted, it can be all kinds of stuff, right? So if there's something that you do and there's a community around a hobby or something you're passionate about, there's a good chance that you can make money off of it. Other things like Upwork are good for freelancers, and Fiverr, Clarity, like there's tons and tons of opportunities out there for freelancers, for different people to be independent. So if you're somebody that has kind of been disappointed with every job that you've ever had, maybe think hard about what it might look like for you to be on your own. As somebody that went out on their own a year ago, I've never been happier. But like I said, there's a lot of resources, there's a lot of stuff to navigate. And so we wanted to put together a little bit of structure. So I think that one thing that I'm noticing is that there's a lot of people that are kind of spamming and saying, I need a job, I need seeking opportunities, period, right? So looking for anything and everything. And I think that there's a lot of people doing that. And I think the people that do that will get lost in the noise very easily. The approach that seems to be much more effective is to identify a target and go after that target in an intentional way. And figuring out what that target is, obviously, if you have the luxury of patience and time to figure that out, there's a good chance that you'll be able to find something that you'll like a lot more than just whatever the first opportunity is that pops up. So assuming you've got a target, then figure out what skills you need, right? So training, education, is it something that you need to go back to school for? And that should probably be a factor in whether you want to go after that. There's a lot of resources out there, right? From certification, training. I think if certification and education is not mandatory, you still need to learn as much as you can about that industry, about the new thing that you're going into. That way you can add value to the conversations when you're networking. The resume is getting less important. It's more of a checkbox, but the online presence has never been more important, especially now. So looking at your future, being focused on kind of adding value as opposed to asking for stuff is big. And I'll say this over and over, they will Google you. As when I was a hiring manager, that was the first thing I did. Once I found a resume that I put on the short list, I Googled them. I found their Twitter, found their Facebook, found their Instagram, and if it was some old kind of crazy college party pics, okay, I can get past that. But there were some where I threw the resume in the trash because it was offensive or racist or whatever it is. And so people will find you if there's stuff online that you don't want out there. So the next piece, focusing on your target. I think Emily, you've got some really good advice to give for folks to network.
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to LinkedIn, kind of the way that I look at LinkedIn, right? So you have your public profile. That's really for people to find you, right? So the more detailed information you have on there is really going to paint a picture to who you are as a person, who you are professionally, kind of what you're targeting, right? So especially if you're looking at, for example, going out of oil and gas into, a particular industry, right? You want to target each of those. So you have your jobs listed on your profile. You want to target the descriptions, kind of cater them to, after you do a little bit of soul searching and figure out, okay, I want to, go into more of the sales side. Well, maybe you weren't particularly doing sales in the past, but you've done some aspects that could translate. You're going to want to put as much detail under each of those job descriptions, because it makes your profile look more complete. But then on the back end, so somebody like myself or my team of recruiters that is searching for people on LinkedIn, and people are still searching for talent, even midst of a pandemic, a lot of the more information you have, the more you're going to come up in searches, right? Another thing too that, very remedial, but your profile picture, you need to have a profile picture. It needs to be professional. And then right underneath your profile picture, you'll have your name, and then you have like a tagline, right? So if I were, let's say, I was looking for a job, I would put my tagline something of, talented account manager seeking opportunity in sales in X, Y, and Z market, right? That's going to make me flag for more opportunities, from a HR, searches or recruiter search. And then on the flip side of that, so you have your public profile. Something else that's really important too is utilizing that LinkedIn as a networking tool, right? Because you can't expect, especially right now, people might not come to you, right? You need to utilize your network. And one thing that I think everybody really wants to help people, especially in these times, if you target maybe somebody that has a similar background or is part of a company that you might be interested in, going back to kind of what Matt was talking about, not emailing and asking for a job. A lot of people are asking for jobs right now. So how can we be creative? Maybe it's, hey, Matt, I really like your background, at X, Y, and Z company. Can you talk to me about, that your day-to-day or anything like that to gain insight and build those relationships? Because the relationships, from my seat and my perspective in the recruiting world, the two ways we find the best talent is a lot through LinkedIn, and majority of the time is going to be through a referral. And the way that you're going to get those referrals is by having those conversations. Everybody wants to help. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of insight onto LinkedIn and the networking piece.
Oh, that's awesome, Emily. Thanks, Mark, putting in the chat. LinkedIn Premium, that's a good reminder, has good classes. And you can do the free trial, and then I think the classes might have been free for a little bit or something like that. So LinkedIn offers classes for a lot of this stuff directly as well. Just to point out kind of the power of this stuff. So this webinar, 300 some odd people signed up, 150 or so are here. It's completely because of LinkedIn, right? So I posted who might be interested in this kind of thing. A bunch of people said yes. So started putting it together, reconnected with Natasha, I think through LinkedIn again. Danny, I saw he posted something in a similar vein, and so I reached out to him. Colin McClelland, one of the guys that founded Digital Wildcatters, he reached out to me after I had posted about the webinar. We'll get to some content on data science. I talked to a data scientist to help answer some of the questions about that came in. Really, really cool stuff. So the power of it probably cannot be overstated right now. So I think this is a big part of where we want to go from here is to talk about kind of the real things that are going on in people's heads as they start to leave the industry, looking for a big life change, different things like that. So next we'll have Danny Watson. He'll tell his story, and I'll give a brief intro for you, Danny. But he was a reservoir engineer, grew up through the ranks, made it up into leadership levels within oil and gas companies, and then decided to leave for a different opportunity. And so I think he's got a really good perspective, and he's thought pretty deeply about kind of the issues that people are facing and stuff like that. So with that, I'll let Danny tell his story. And then after Danny's story, we'll get to the Q&A. So be sure that you're putting in questions, voting for questions that you want answered in the Q&A, because that's the bulk of the prepared content. There's a couple other things that we'll get to, but yeah, don't forget about the questions to type in at the bottom. So, all right, Danny.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So this is from gas to SaaS, and I think we've talked a lot about the two SaaS part, and I think I'm going to step in and talk about the from gas piece of this. And so I've had several conversations with folks over the last several months about this topic, and I've come up with this theme of barriers to exit because it seems very relevant to the parallel of barriers to entry to some industries. It feels like with oil and gas, there are barriers to exit that just make it kind of hard to leave. And the two biggest ones that seem to come up deal with the financial aspect of it and then the direct relevant experience aspect of things. So hopefully my story will be something that's relatable and can find some insight to help with those issues. And so again, I was in oil and gas for a little over 10 years, and I rode the wave of the great crew change. And so what that resulted in was I got to hit my midlife crisis by the time I was about 30. I was able to climb several ladders associated with pay and with title. And I realized that although I thought for the longest time that eventually I would get to a spot where I have made it, that I would climb those ladders and I would realize that there was always a rung or two that seemed like it was higher and that they never ended, and that the pay and the titles weren't actually ever going to satisfy my soul. So what was I going to do with that? And I really related to a Lily Tomlin quote, and that is, the problem with the rat race is that even if you win, you're still a rat, right? And so wasn't getting a lot of complete joy in that. And so I had to process through that issue. And so I basically realized that I was treating something as an end that really should have been treated as a means. And so you take that and you run a parallel path that is, I'm a big fan of mission and vision and purpose. And I think that there is a ton of mission and vision and purpose in oil and gas. I think that cheap energy and clean water have done more to change the world for good than most any other technology out there. But it feels like a lot of that's been diluted recently. And it seems like there's just the generic mission statement across the board, and that is oil and gas companies for the most part exist to maximize shareholder value. And I don't think that there's anything that's necessarily wrong with that, but I found myself sitting in way too many meetings in which decisions were being made essentially against wise counsel from technical experts and financial teams. And instead of maximizing shareholder value, it really seemed like the goal was self-preservation by some folks at the top. And I would talk to colleagues at other companies, and I would realize that this was just not unique to my company. And I don't know if that's necessarily something that is just truth in oil and gas, or it's publicly traded oil and gas, or if it's publicly traded companies in general. But I just found that I couldn't align myself with that environment and that mindset anymore. And so I realized that there were opportunities that were outside of oil and gas. And so having that epiphany about money and possessions and things early on made it to where that barrier to exit was really quite easy at that point. I did take quite a pay cut to leave, but that decision does not bother me to this day. It's been well worth it. The other one, though, was the direct relevant experience. And so reservoir engineering to pediatric therapy. I don't forecast reserves these days. We don't do that in pediatric therapy. I'm not out trying to book PUDs or anything like that. There is no real direct relevant experience that crosses over. However, the skills that I honed and developed over those 10 years in oil and gas that were related to that experience are something that are incredibly valuable in my new role, and that are valuable, quite frankly, in so many other roles across so many other industries. I'm analytical, I'm very detail oriented, I'm a problem solver. I love data. I love to see data trended through history so I can try to trend through and extrapolate, build financial models, so on and so forth. And so all of those things that I learned through oil and gas and developed, again, they've helped me a ton in my new role. And so I would say, for those of you that are saying, well, what do I do with 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years of specific experience in land or in pipeline engineering or reserves or whatever it might be? I would say to try to focus less on the exact bullet points for the details of the responsibilities and focus way more on, well, what are the skills that I bring to the table that other companies and other industries might find valuable? And so those were really the two big barriers. And I'm here on the other side. I'm living proof that you can do it. It's just a matter of taking a step out in faith and realizing that it can be done. And I'd love to make myself available as a resource to anyone that needs a sounding board and to process any of those barriers. So that's all I have.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Danny. Do you want to talk at all about the pay? Switching what oil and gas salaries might have looked like over the last few years?
Yeah, so it's an interesting thing. I originally chose oil and gas, I'm not going to lie, because of the pay. And so again, realizing that it wasn't quite going to do it, but realize that helped with leaving. But I also had to come to this realization that over the past 10 or so years, especially since the shale revolution began, the great crew change and all of that, salaries, let's just be real, it's really hard, especially from a technical perspective, to go get a degree and go into any other industry and start where oil and gas folks were starting. And so I think that one of the real hard things to deal with in making that change because of that is that there's this false notion that salary and pay is equal to someone's value and worth. And so we have to be able, from an ego perspective and that selfish perspective, or from a comparison perspective, to be able to say that that's simply not true, and that your value and your worth is far beyond some salary, and it's way more tied to your humanity than anything. And so, but that said, there are opportunities in other industries, and you go out, you prove yourself. I love Pat Lencioni's ideal team player. If you're hungry, humble, and smart, you can go out, you can learn how to do the job, and you'll find success in that. And it's just a matter of how you're going to define that success, whether it's financially or through contribution to the world or whatever it may be.
Awesome. Yeah, I appreciate it, Danny. All right, so we'll get into some of the Q&A that came in with people's registration. So we'll run through a few of those, and then we'll start getting to some of the Q&A that are coming in through the chat. And so be sure to keep putting your Q&A in the Q&A section, not in just the chat. And that'll make sure that it can get voted on and seen by everybody. Okay, so remember who we are. So the first one, how do I answer the layoff question? That's a fun one. Emily, do you want to start there?
Yeah, for sure. So full transparency, the layoff question, every hiring manager is always going to say, want to know why you left previous companies, right? A little bit of the light at the end of the tunnel, if you were laid off, especially most of it's recent due to COVID or oil and gas, that's a very easy thing to tackle. I mean, you just be very honest and say it was, layoffs due to oil and gas. Like there should not be a reason for somebody to look at you negatively because you were laid off within the last couple months. And, from previous conversations, Danny brought up a very good point. If the company that you're talking to is negative about that, then that might not be somewhere that you want to work. But that should be a very easy question to answer. And you should not feel bad about being laid off because, there's so many people that are in the same boat.
Yeah, for sure. I think if you've been laid off from 7 different jobs over the last 7 years, then you might have to come up with, might be a little harder to answer. But ones that go with the market and things like that, I think they should understand. Okay, awesome. Thanks, Emily. So the next one, this one came in quite a bit, was should I learn to code? Should I become a programmer? And I hope that a lot of the information that we've kind of put into this deck and everything can help you answer that, because that's really a question that only you can answer because it depends on so much stuff. Whether you want to be a programmer, right? Learning how to code and being a programmer are very, very different things. And the way that work looks is unique. So Emily, do you want to talk a little bit about kind of the market, what languages, things like that, for people that if they say yes to that question?
Yeah, absolutely. So if, you know, from what we see out in the market right now, I would say JavaScript and Python are going to be the two most common languages that are requested. I do get a lot of .NET positions as well. But as far as the most user-friendly people that, you know, I've actually had personal friends that are on the engineering side and want to go into peer development, and that start with Python. Python and JavaScript are both user-friendly languages. I'm not hands-on myself. I am not a coder, but you know, from my understanding and from what I see in the market and here, you know, those two languages are going to be the most common, especially now where everything is geared towards data. Python is going to be pretty much in anything data related. Python is always going to help. Again, that is a question that you would have to answer yourself depending on what you actually want to do.
Cool. So I think the follow-up to that is, if so, how? I think Emily mentioned some great things. Had several people ask about boot camps. And so I asked a friend of mine, he was an engineer, taught himself how to code and became a programmer. He's a team lead with a fairly large software company now. Now he's a little bit special. He was writing his own websites when he was like 18 months old or something, but his input, he gave a couple of resources here, and I'm not going to read through or spend a bunch of time making you guys read his email, but his guidance was really good. There's boot camps are good for some things, very bad for others. There's alternatives to boot camps. And I think the overarching message from what he said is that if learning kind of on your own and doing projects, right? Building, whether it's apps or web development or whatever it is, even more important than a resume or education is like a portfolio of work that you've done. When he's looking at resumes, when he's looking at stuff like that. So yeah, several paragraphs that he wrote. I'll include this in what we send out when we send out this deck, so you guys that are interested here can read through that.
And
another one.
Oh, sorry, Matt.
Go ahead. Sorry.
As with the coding, the Q&A, there was one question that could be answered within the last slide too. Something along the lines of, I don't have any professional coding experience. How do I get past that? Basically for an interview or for like going through job descriptions. If you're self-taught, and because the person that mentioned that said that they know how to code, Matt had mentioned projects. You can include your projects on a resume, even though it's not professional experience. Sometimes that's even better. So, you know, including links or maybe your GitHub link, different things like that would really help you in that aspect. So hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, and that lines up with what Josh said also. So that's it. And it's kind of cool that the hiring process for developers has kind of matured that way, to look at a portfolio or proof of work as opposed to education or experience. So that's a good opening for sure. Okay. Next one, a lot of folks asked about data science and how do I get into it? What do I need to learn? What roles are there? That kind of stuff. And so disclaimer, none of us on this panel are data scientists or have a ton of experience here, but I did reach out to someone I found on LinkedIn, again, powerful networking, and got some input from a PhD in data science, which is pretty sweet. So one of the things when we talk about the different roles within data science is that machine learning, right? It seems to require a lot more education. It's more research focused. And so that's going to be a harder one to kind of break into from an entry level. But from the same token, right? If that's where you really want to go, that's your purpose, that's your mission, then those are some of the steps. The more achievable or more easily accessible one seem to be the analytics and reporting side. So I think oil and gas, tons and tons and tons of data, reservoir engineers, geologists understand a ton about putting data to use. And I think the jump from using Excel and access to wrangle data and turn it into something useful is less of a jump than jumping from there to SQL is less of a jump than going from there to full programming. So that might be an interesting route. And so I think the roles around that can be data analysts and looking for companies with data science teams and things like that, which are huge. There's tons and tons of those, and they're growing. And then the generalist, right? That's the blend of the other two. And again, I think that one requires a bit more education for sure. But programming is definitely a necessity in each of these. It's just a matter of whether it's focused on modeling and things like that versus data management and integrations and stuff. Anything to add there, Emily, Natasha, anybody? Cool. All right. So a tough one, right? So I'm 20 plus years into my career. Is it too late?
I can chime in on that one.
There you go.
No, it's absolutely not too late. With anything, and we've gone back to this point a couple times, but to really drive it home, the best way is to utilize your network, especially if you are 20 years into your career, changing trajectory. You should have, and if you don't have it now, let's start working on it, but a very wide network of contacts, right? So the more people you can connect with and let them know that you are looking for a change, that, in my personal opinion, that is going to be the best way to find an in into a new company. And that's really not even only for somebody 20 years into their career, but it's for pretty much everybody looking.
I think also it's very common in software for people to stay in a role for anywhere from 1 to 4 years and then switch. It's almost like it looks poorly for you if you've been in the same role for a long time. So think of it as, stepping stones. It might be just to get into the right company. It might not be exactly the role that you want, but knowing that it's going to progress from there.
Yeah. And then I think there's all the anecdotes about people that have done very interesting things late in life. Like Peter Drucker, he wrote something like 10 books after the age of 86 or something. I went to grad school with a guy. He went back to get his master's in applied mathematics at the age of 62 because he wanted to go into analytics and get into a different field. And he did that successfully at 64 or 65, whatever it was. So it's definitely possible. It's hard and it takes work, but kind of like Emily said, that network and finding people and making those connections with people is the way to get it done. Okay. All right, so this one was good. So in an interview recently, somebody was asked, once oil prices come back, will you go back to your high-paying job? I think that this is a place where you might want to hide your optimism about the oil industry if you've got any left, but at the same time, I think it's about being honest, right? If you're leaving the industry because you're sick of layoffs and cycles and things like that, then that's a powerful message. If you're leaving just because you need money, right, then you're probably going after sales jobs and things like that. So I think being as honest as you can with this kind of question and with any question, I think makes a lot of sense. Emily, Natasha, Danny, any input on that one?
I think you summed it up well, Matt.
Cool. Thanks, buddy. All right, so we'll answer this one. Emily, if you're not already, could you take a look through the questions, and because this is the last one that we've got prepped for, and see which ones we want to tackle before we close out. So this one, how do I get my foot in the door? I think a lot of the stuff that we've talked about during this session has answered parts of this, but it's really down to persistence and on LinkedIn, engaging in conversation, showing your value and asking interesting questions and things like that. and kind of finding that target and doing whatever you can to add value into that network, as opposed to just having me ask, is what comes to mind for me.
Another one there, Matt, is so LinkedIn for sure, but meetups. Like I used to run a whole bunch of customer success meetups when I was at Gainsight, and it was a great way for people that wanted to get into the industry. They could meet like-minded people and figure out what the job market was like. So, and even now everyone's moved to virtual. So I would, sign up for as many meetups with topics that are of interest to you, because that's a good way. Then you can meet people directly through that as well.
Awesome.
Yeah, so one specific question in here that I just came across, somebody struggling with the jargon in the tech industry, coming from oil and gas, going into basically a whole nother language, right? What are some tips, essentially to help with that, to bridge that gap? One resource that just comes to mind when I'm reading this question, there's a website called dice.com. It's like rolling a dice, dice.com. They have tons and tons and tons of resources. There's even, when I started in my position too, like I said, because I'm not technical, right? So I had to learn a lot of jargon. There's a glossary that is very helpful on Dice. Just technology podcasts, because then you're listening from a real human versus reading, from a website or a textbook. But yeah, Dice is going to have a ton of good resources for that. And there were a couple of questions that were pretty similar to that. So hopefully that will help some people. And you can also build a profile on Dice and put your resume out there too.
Cool. Okay. What other, so we do have several questions that came through. So I know we're running up close to an hour, but we'll run a little long and keep going as long as we have the steam and are answering questions. So Emily, were there any others that we want to try to tackle here?
Yeah, there's one. I have a great software idea. How do I get that off the ground, and how do I kind of tackle hiring for that position? Maybe Danny might be a good person to answer this on starting a company. Same with Natasha.
So, what I would state is I don't necessarily have the direct experience there, because the company that I founded, sorry, I have a 4-year-old that is not respecting the boundary here. So, no, go. Sorry, Natasha, could you maybe?
Yeah, sorry, Emily, can you repeat the question? What was the one we're asking?
Yeah, for sure. So essentially, if somebody has an idea for a company, or maybe a app, what is the best way to kind of get off the ground and start from scratch?
I would think maybe for that one, you'd want to network with incubators. So there's incubators that are usually more city-centric. And I think of the old world, like the pre-COVID world, but that might be the best way, because you could find somebody that would be a potential investor. You could share your idea and just see if it has any weight. Beyond that, yeah, because I think they would give you a roadmap of what all the steps. So they're designed to help people just like yourself with an idea to bring it to fruition and to see if it's valid. So that would probably be the one that I would recommend.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to finding developers, there are companies out there that do development for startups, and I know some of them have interesting models where their payment is equity in your company as opposed to paying them. So if cash flow is an issue or things like that. But as far as the different skill sets, there's full stack developers, there's people that specialize in web development, apps, specific languages and things like that. And so if you don't have any idea what you need, then finding that person, or maybe it's a company that has those kind of services that does development as a service for people, then reaching out to them to help you kind of guide and figure out what exactly it is, what skill sets you need. For sure.
There's another question. Basically, how can I make sure my resume profile is standing out while I'm searching for jobs, right? You know, one thing that I tell people, a lot of folks don't realize this, might not be an answer you want to hear, but on all the job boards, the more you update and save your resume, somebody good in recruiting is going to find you regardless, but the more you update and save your profile on Indeed, Dice, LinkedIn, you know, all the job boards, you're essentially bringing your resume up to the top of a pile. So on the back end, when people are searching for people, you know, talent, the more you save, the more your profile will kind of come up on top, where it shows that you're actively looking too. That's kind of, some people don't realize that. I like to tell people that a lot. And then second piece to that is get your resume in the hands of as many folks as you can. And then also have, you know, even if you think your resume looks great, it does not hurt to get a second set of eyes on it. Third, fourth, you know, as many people can look at your resume as possible. That would really help you too.
Yeah, and one, I mean, my own experience on resumes is if the top third of the page is not very interesting, I'm not going to read any further, right? And especially now when the stack is just so huge, if it's not very interesting and immediately applicable, then it's just not going to get a chance. Okay.
There was a question.
Just another one on that one. It's also good to be, you know, gently persistent with people. Like if you send them your resume, hit them up on LinkedIn, let them know that you just sent it to them. Like find creative ways to make sure that you move to the top of the list. And I spoke to a hiring manager from a company called eCompliance, which would be a good transition for people in oil and gas because they have a lot of oil and gas customers. So the industry knowledge would be helpful. And when she built out her customer success team, she purposely didn't want anybody with CS experience. She looked for people that didn't have that skill set. And she actually recommended that you should change your LinkedIn profile title to the job that you're going for if the skills that you had in your previous role were transferable. That way, when she's searching for people, you're going to show up because she's not going to necessarily look for the title that you had before. So just another idea. You can be kind of creative with A/B testing as well. Sorry, Emily.
No, you're good. Another question came from, are companies still adding recruiting experts? From my perspective, yes. we've got tons of people utilizing our services. So I definitely think, you know, from a candidate perspective, get your resume in the hands of as many recruiters as you can. You know, your personal network and, you know, people you don't know, reach out to them for sure.
Good.
Let's see, scrolling through.
Looks like
I have a hard time wrapping my head around how to promote what I want to do in the future. How would I use my time now to build a road later on when it's all said and done? I don't know if anybody has any input on how to promote yourself other than the networking piece.
Yeah, well, I think that promoting yourself, and I think I said it a couple of times, but adding value to conversations on LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever it is, and just letting your ideas and thoughts speak for themselves. So posting interesting things, sharing things that you think are useful, right? A lot of that kind of stuff. But I know self-promotion feels dirty in a lot of places, and I think people are jaded because they've been pushed to do promotion of things that they don't really believe in for companies or elsewhere. And for me anyway, I have absolutely no qualms about promoting something that I think is actually helpful and valuable to people. So if you really think that you're helpful and valuable, then you shouldn't have any issues promoting and saying, I've got these skills. I saw another question about being an operations manager in oil and gas and how could that apply? Good leaders are needed absolutely everywhere, right? And people that can lead people, that care about other human beings and also get things done. Those types of positions, there's a lot out there. And yeah, some companies promote internally and value that internal experience, but companies do look for kind of infusions of somebody that thinks differently quite a bit. And so looking for somebody that is not in the kind of tech Silicon Valley bubble, that there is very much kind of a cycle that people get into there. Looking for different type of thinkers is pretty common out there.
Another question that came through, modern sales is a lot different between 10 and 20 years ago. How does one utilize modern sales techniques to sway people who may be used to traditional products and don't have a desire to change anything they're doing? That could be an all-day question.
Yeah, I mean, that one's a whole conversation in itself.
Yeah, if you have zero desire to change what you're doing, good luck.
Yeah, but Travis, I'd be happy to chat one-on-one if you wanted to, just about what sales materials and who are good to follow out there, and how sales has changed a lot, because salespeople are getting trained on all these different techniques about how to build return on investments and business cases, and there's like the challenger customer, challenger sale, which is a concept which might be of interest as well. But that's true. Like you're always getting these organizations to make massive transformations and shift from where they were before.
Yeah, and Natasha, I think you had shared some good resources in the deck that we'll send out on cerebral selling, right? There's YouTube channel, book, blog, stuff like that. The guy behind that seems to be putting together really good content for people. But yeah, I think from my perspective, the biggest shift has gone from, I think people want to be sold the result and the outcome of whatever the thing is. They don't care as much about features or about speed and like different things like that. Or they don't get super excited about cost reduction in most places, right? A lot of it is about the value that the software or the technology can provide, and thinking about that person. So are they able to have a big impact on their company that helps get them promoted and does all of these other things? So what are the outcomes that person really cares about?
And then one other question that came through: do you have any examples of geologists, petrophysicists who made the move out of oil and gas into the tech software industry? So I don't know if any of y'all have anybody that y'all could talk about on that side. I personally don't have any geologists that moved into tech.
I absolutely do, and I'm trying to think of who they are. I'm blanking on where they went, because I know I have a few different friends that did that.
One of my former clients was a company called Geosoft, and they actually got acquired by a New Zealand company. So that might be of interest to you. You find software products that are in that space, and then that makes, you have the industry experience.
Yep.
Is it worth getting an MBA for Connections Network to find new jobs?
No.
I know.
My opinion, but I think there are ways to build a good network and get that exact same knowledge without spending $100,000 in 2 years of your life.
I agree.
Okay. I have friends that have done it and get a lot of value out of it and things like that. But I think traditional education there's a lot of things that are being proven to be wrong about it. And there's a lot of fluff in there, where 10% of the value, but and there's 90% junk in there. And I think a lot of people are kind of realizing that. So again, that's a very personal decision, whether it makes sense or not, but personal opinion is no in most cases.
Yeah, and going back to, we kind of tackled this question too, but about suggestions for searching and finding job openings. One thing I just thought of when I looked back at that question too, if you're searching for specific jobs right now, I highly recommend to filter the dates. So look at within the last month or so. There's a lot of jobs posted out there right now that may look like the job is open, but they're really old. I noticed that a lot. So there are, on all of those job boards, you can filter it by date of posting. So, a month, 2 weeks back might help you to find recent positions.
Yep. So one that I saw that was interesting that came up, saw today that Google is no longer working on AI for oil and gas. How do you handle the reputation of oil and gas outside the industry, and especially in Silicon Valley, more liberal geographies and things like that. And I think that some of that stuff gets politicized, and when things are political, it's a little bit like religion. It's really tough to have a reasonable conversation. And so if it's that kind of scenario, then I think you have to kind of avoid it if you can. But I think that there are absolutely facts that could help people understand, but I think people are going to care more about you than the industry that you came from. And so if your purpose for working in oil and gas was, like Danny said, to provide cheap energy and clean water to people on Earth, that's really good, as opposed to ravaging the land for money. I think depending on what your purpose is, then that can resonate with people. I think honestly, the bigger barrier for people leaving oil and gas is adoption of technology. Right? Even myself, I'm still using PowerPoint, and I'm not using Google Slides or Keynote or something that's more collaborative and better. Using Slack, like a lot of the different technologies and just maturity of kind of business processes. That's a tough one for a lot of people, because Excel was always the hammer from my experience, no matter if it was a nail or a screw or something completely different.
One question that just came through too, essentially with COVID's impact on almost all industries, there's a lot of people on the market, that are highly skilled. How do I, once I've identified my target, kind of how can I make myself not lost in the noise? And the way I read that is kind of maybe not getting lost in just a pool of applications. So I don't know if anybody has any recommendations on that side.
Yeah, I would say even though there's like this flood, there's also these companies that are going to be hiring quite a bit too. Like Shopify said they've moved, everyone's not at the office, but they don't plan on putting everyone back to the office. They're planning on shutting them down altogether. So I think there's going to be a huge opportunity, because people are going to be hiring based on skill, not necessarily location. The other thing I've done in the past is people just ping me directly on LinkedIn. So you don't necessarily have to go through the hiring manager process if you're looking for a role. Like, network with other people inside that company. Connect directly with the hiring manager or other people that might be able to help you get up to speed about the organization, which can help you prep for the interview. Or you might even be able to just secure a 10-minute call with somebody. Just 10 minutes is always easy to get. So just ask somebody for 10 minutes of their time, and I'm sure someone will jump on the phone with you.
Yeah, and another thing that I've found useful, I wasn't doing this intentionally, but finding mentors and asking people, hey, I look up to you, you know a lot about this, can you teach me? Like, that's a huge compliment to be asked to be a mentor for somebody. And so you'll have a pretty good chance of getting some time with them when it's framed that way. And most of the time, the people that you want to be mentored by are in a position that you'd want to be in, and so they have better networks in that area and things like that. So it's both a good thing, and and it can help you out.
This has not been asked. So seems like companies are very reluctant to bring people in right now, talking about interviews. What are your thoughts when trying to get that new position? So basically, how do we feel about interviewing right now with COVID-19 and a global crisis? I can speak personally on that side from my client perspective. Interviews are still happening, it's delayed. A lot of it is delayed, but there are people still hiring and actively hiring. In fact, most of the interviews that I personally witnessed, I have had some people go on site. Most people are doing virtual interviews, whether it be Zoom, WebEx, Blue Jeans, different things of that nature. But yeah, people are still interviewing. It's obviously, not as easy as it was 2.5 months ago, but they're definitely still happening. We're just, I think as in all industries, people are trying to get more creative with how are we going to fill those seats virtually.
Yeah, and the great thing is you don't have to wear pants if
Yeah.
you're interviewing from home. So.
And I'd agree, like we work with software companies and sure there are some that have been hurt really bad, but there's a lot that are still doing really well right now, or they've maybe plateaued, they've pulled back on some hiring, but they're, you know, it's just delaying a decision by a month or two. So I don't think there's ever any, you know, it's never a waste of time to still be persisting. And then even if you have an interview, but maybe nothing happens for 2 months.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think with all the companies that are going fully remote also, that opens up opportunities for people across the world that, I mean, somebody in Midland now can work for a company in San Francisco, no problem.
Tailoring a resume, asking about including keywords from the job description. Looks like we're overselling, copying and pasting key terms. From a hiring perspective, have y'all noticed that from people? And I feel like you can probably read right through it.
Yeah, it's blatantly obvious.
Don't do that.
Yeah, so I mean, I appreciate it when people tailor their resume to the job, but if they take all the skills required in the job posting and then paste them in the top third of their resume, it's just obvious. And then that'll get me to read the rest of the resume, but then I'll look at the rest of the resume and none of that applies to the skills that they said they had at the top. So not only do I throw the resume away, now I don't like the person.
So we just got one other one that's, oh, go ahead, Natasha.
I was just going to say, you know, another thing, like what Matt talked a little bit about the marketing role, right? Something that SDRs do who work for marketing departments is they will send videos to try to secure a call with their prospective client. And that's something that you might be able to do here too, is be more creative, like record a short video of yourself, have it, you know, enclose it when you send your resume across so they can get a feel for you. And it shows that you can embrace technology. So yeah, just another idea there.
That's awesome. Good idea.
Absolutely. So how can you tailor your resume to the job description and be successful with that versus just copying and pasting? I don't know if anybody has feedback on that from folks that they've interviewed. The best way probably to take, I mean, it really depends on the job, right, that you're looking for. To answer that question, I think that, you know, you might want to reach out to, you know, somebody for advice that has a lot of, you know, job, like, I guess, I don't know, experience interviewing, different things like that, to kind of look at a job description and look at your resume and find that fine line between I'm not copying, I'm not lying, but I'm also catering it, I guess is the best
Yeah.
way.
Well, to me, the tailoring of the resume should be, okay, which of my skills should I highlight for this job? Not, should I act like I have skills I don't have? So if you're a good project manager, but you're also a really good independent contributor, so depending on the role, you might focus more on, okay, I'm good at coordinating resources and managing people and all this stuff if it's a project manager role, versus if it's an individual contributor, you might highlight your technical capabilities a little bit more and stuff like that.
Is it helpful to contribute to open source software projects to build a portfolio? Can you recommend any?
My sense is absolutely yes. I can't recommend any, but for nothing else, it's learning. And then especially if one of these projects gets large, then that's definitely goes on the resume and might even have some notoriety.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Matt, did you see any other questions that I feel like we covered most in here?
Yeah. Another one on the jargon in the tech industry. I think we touched on this one, but it was early on in the deck. Brittany, right? If you're still here, then there's a couple of links to like glossaries to manage some of that different stuff. So. Yeah, I think that's the majority of it. And I think we've still got 80 people here, but we're trailing off. So I think this is a good time to close. Really appreciate Emily, Danny, Natasha, you guys contributing to this. Obviously no no sales pitch coming hard at the end to get you to sign up for our 12-week app building course or anything like that. I really, really appreciate I'm very inspired by all the people that just thanklessly decided to, hey, I'm going to pitch in and help on this. You guys here, there's several other people in the background. I mentioned a couple of them that contributed information and answered questions for us to help us answer your guys' questions. So I don't know, this has just been amazing to me, and I really hope that this helped people out. The only ask that I have is that if it helped you out, let me know. Let us know, because that would just be really cool to know that this work that we did here could help people find a job or find fulfillment or get somebody closer to where they want to be. So everybody that showed up, thank you. Questions in the chat. I saw a bunch of people were very active in the chat, more links and resources and stuff in there. Thank you all.